They say a single act of kindness can spark 1,000 miracles. Amid the roaring wind and swirling snow that paralyzed the small town of Greenhaven, a simple, unassuming diner stood as a beacon of hope and a stage for a story that would leave the entire country astonished. Picture this: a determined black diner owner named Marlon, an empty stretch of Interstate 90, blanketed by a whiteout blizzard, and a band of stranded truckers left with nowhere to turn. What happened next could only be described as the convergence of fate and generosity, the kind that makes you believe in the power of humanity once again. It all began on a dark December afternoon. Across the countryside of upstate New York, people whispered about a massive winter storm heading eastward, an event meteorologists were calling one for the history books. For weeks, the region had been blessed or cursed, depending on one's attitude towards snow, with milder weather than expected, so it seemed the forces of nature were about to balance the scales in spectacular fashion. Greenhaven was a modest town, resting off the beaten path near Interstate 90, a famous corridor that connected multiple states. The main thoroughfare had seen its share of passing travelers, cargo trucks hauling produce or electronics, families on cross-country holidays, and vacationers heading to the scenic Finger Lakes region. Nestled between a row of weather-beaten storefronts sat a diner that might have gone unnoticed in ordinary times, unless you happened to peer through its neon sign, flickering Marlon's Eats. Marlon Freeman, the owner and head cook, had earned a reputation far greater than his humble business facade suggested. A tall man in his late 40s with a salt and pepper beard, Marlon was known to greet everyone, stranger or local alike, with a broad, welcoming smile and a handshake. The diner was famous at least among truckers along that stretch for its fried chicken and sweet potato pie, the latter a recipe his late mother taught him before she passed away. Even as the first flakes of the coming storm began to fall on that December day, no one quite knew how quickly it would intensify. By evening, the wind started howling fiercely. The local news broadcast from a small station called WNYX in Syracuse predicted a snowfall that might drop over 2 feet by morning. Marlon was in the diner, standing by the counter, with his eyes locked on the window. He watched the snowfall change from a gentle swirl to a raging blizzard in a matter of minutes. He had just flipped the diner's sign from open to closed when the power flickered overhead, causing the lights to blink ominously. From the back, Maggie Marlon's longtime waitress, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with thick-rimmed glasses, poked her head out. "The wind is howling like a banshee out there," Maggie said. "We better lock up and head home before it gets worse." Marlon nodded, grabbing his coat, then paused. He felt the old sense of responsibility clutch at his heart. For a man who had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Rochester, where every day felt like a scramble for survival, he had learned the power of neighbors and strangers extending a hand. He'd made a vow that whenever possible, he'd do the same for others. The instincts honed by adversity told him it wasn't right to leave just yet. But he didn't say it out loud. Together they stepped outside, bracing themselves against the gusts of frigid air. The parking lot was already coated with a treacherous layer of ice. The diner's neon sign flickered again, valiantly defying the wind. Maggie tugged her coat tighter. "Well," she exclaimed, "I'll see you tomorrow if we're not buried by then." Marlon gave her a wave and watched her climb into her car. He began to walk toward his own small pickup truck, but just then a flash of headlights emerged from the swirling snow. It was a semi-truck slowly inching its way off the exit ramp toward the diner's parking lot. The massive vehicle was fighting the storm tires spinning as it strove for traction. Marlon stood in wonder, unsure if the driver would manage to park or slide on the ice. Finally, the truck came to a lumbering halt under a dim street lamp. Its door opened, and down stepped a weary-looking driver in a heavy coat, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. He gazed around as though searching for help. The diner's lights were off, but seeing Marlon standing outside, the man quickly trudged over. "Hey," he shouted over the wind. "Is there a place I can park safely around here? The roads are shutting down left and right, and I can't see more than a few feet. I need somewhere to ride this storm out." Marlon glanced at the diner behind him, then at the swirling white chaos. "You can leave your rig here," he said, raising his voice. "I was closing up, but if you want, come inside to warm up." Relief flooded the driver's face. "That would be mighty kind. I'm Rick, by the way. Been on the road for hours. Didn't realize the storm would hit this hard." They shook hands, and Marlon led Rick back to the front door of the diner. Part of Marlon sensed this was just the beginning, that more lost souls would come trudging through the snow before long. With a sigh, he flipped the closed sign back to open. If kindness had a face, it would have been Marlon Freeman's that night. Inside the diner, Marlon flicked on the lights and showed Rick to a booth near the window. The trucker removed his gloves, rubbed his hands together, and nodded in gratitude as the warmth of the heater embraced him. Marlon poured him a cup of coffee, placing it before him. "Cream and sugar are on the table," he said. "You must be starved, too." Rick's eyes widened as he nodded eagerly. "You have no idea. I've been living off cold sandwiches and coffee for days." Marlon stepped into the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge to see what was left for the day. "How about a plate of fried chicken, some mashed potatoes, and green beans?" he offered. "That sounds like heaven," Rick said, the exhaustion evident in his voice. Marlon got to work, the sizzle of oil and the aroma of spices filling the air. While the chicken fried Marlon's mind raced with thoughts of the storm's potential fury. On the TV, hung near the ceiling, local newscasters flashed warnings that nearly all the highways and major roads were being closed off. Wind gusts were reported at nearly 50 mph with drifts that would soon make roads impassable. Outside, the howling continued. Snow piled against the diner's windows, creeping upward like relentless waves. As soon as Rick's food was ready, Marlon set it before him. The trucker tucked in immediately, inhaling the savory meal with grateful gusto. "You sure I'm not keeping you from heading home, Marlon?" Rick asked, wiping some gravy from his mouth. Marlon shrugged. "I live upstairs." He pointed to the building adjacent, which was connected to the diner by a small hallway. "I've got a little apartment there. It's not fancy, but it's home." Rick looked around the otherwise empty diner. "You must not get many customers in a storm like this, huh?" "Not usually," Marlon replied. "But sometimes you'll get drivers like yourself who get caught off guard. I try to keep the doors open as long as possible. No point in letting a traveler freeze out there if I can help it." Moments later, they heard another set of tires crunch over the icy parking lot, accompanied by headlights cutting through the swirling white. Rick turned to look a piece of chicken halfway to his mouth. "You expecting anyone else?" Marlon frowned slightly. "Not that I know of." A second semi-truck pulled in, then a third. Each rig struggled to find a safe spot amidst the fast accumulating snow. One by one, their drivers stumbled inside, breathless and trembling, seeking warmth and comfort. Each wore a battered expression weighed down by hours of intense concentration behind the wheel with minimal visibility. By midnight, Marlon found himself feeding and sheltering no less than 8 stranded truckers. Their stories all mirrored Rick's. They had hoped to beat the storm, or at least press on to the next major town. but conditions deteriorated faster than predicted. They ended up stuck at the nearest exit. As luck would have it, the nearest exit was the one leading to Greenhaven and Marlon's diner. Despite the anxious sense of being outnumbered, Marlon moved quickly and calmly. He served coffee, cooked up every bit of chicken he had scrounged for vegetables and potatoes in the pantry, and even started baking a few pies with leftover ingredients. He heard grateful murmurs about how some diners or gas stations might just lock up and leave. Here they'd found an open door. But even generosity has its limits. By 2 a.m., the diner's stock was already running precariously low. Marlon realized he might not have enough to feed more people if they kept coming. He also worried about how long the storm would rage. As the blizzard intensified, each trucker tried to stay calm, but tension hung thick in the air. The roads were closed, the rest stops full or unreachable. Some had families they worried about. Others had deadlines to meet. They fiddled with their phones, many losing service. Some tried stepping outside to check on their rigs, only to be driven back by blasts of icy wind. By 4 a.m., many had resigned themselves to the reality that the diner was their temporary shelter, and Marlon was their gracious host. Old blankets and pillows from his apartment were handed out. The truckers dozed in booths or on the floor near the kitchen, lulled to an uneasy sleep by the unrelenting hum of the blizzard. Meanwhile, Marlon brewed pot after pot of coffee to keep himself awake. He felt a responsibility far beyond his normal duties. If ever there was a moment to prove that his mother's values of kindness and hospitality were not in vain, it was now. Little did he know this was just the beginning. The storm was a monstrous test, but what would come after might prove even more shocking. The morning light was pale and cold, sifting through the diner's frosted windows. Marlon walked from booth to booth, checking on his new guests. Rick snored lightly, his head buried in his arms. Another trucker, a middle-aged woman named Carla, stirred and stretched, complaining about a kink in her neck from sleeping on the diner's vinyl bench. Coffee, Marlon asked softly, holding a freshly brewed pot. "Please, Carla," croaked her voice raspy from a night of fitful rest. She blinked at the sunlight reflecting off massive drifts of snow. "Wow. We're really snowed in, aren't we?" Marlon gave a rueful grin. "Sure looks that way." Some of the truckers tried to shuffle to the windows. Their eyes widened in disbelief. The parking lot looked like the surface of a frozen tundra, their rigs half buried in snow piles that reached up to the windows. Outside, the wind still whipped through less ferociously. The meteorologists had hinted that the worst of the storm would pass overnight, leaving behind a battered snow-encased landscape. Marlon flicked on the small TV. Sure enough, the news was filled with footage of whiteouts cars, stranded on highways, rescue workers on snowmobiles. Authorities urged everyone to stay put. One by one, the truckers pulled out their phones, checking signals or battery life. Some managed to call dispatchers. Others tried to reach loved ones. They all repeated the same story: the roads wouldn't be cleared anytime soon. They might be stuck there for days. "Good thing we've got a roof and some good food," Carla said, patting her stomach. "We appreciate what you're doing, Marlon." Marlon nodded. "We'll make do. But I'll need to figure out the supplies. I used a lot last night." "Let us help," offered Rick, who had come up behind them. "If you need groceries, we can chip in or walk out to the nearest store." "I think I saw a supermarket a mile down the road." Marlon frowned. Walking a mile in these conditions might be dangerous. "But if the roads stay closed, we'll have to do something." Carla spoke up. "I have some stuff in my rig, canned soup, granola bars. might help stretch the supply. The others also mentioned they had emergency rations in their trucks. With a unified sense of survival, they formed a plan. They would gather any food from the rigs that could be shared. Meanwhile, if the storm lessened enough for them to make a short trip to the local market, they'd do so carefully. The day passed in a strange sort of camaraderie. Marlon cooked what he could, rationing out the chicken and vegetables. The truckers contributed their canned goods. Maggie, who lived only a few blocks away, managed to trudge through the snow, bringing some bread and milk from her own pantry. Despite the dire circumstances, the diner buzzed with laughter, conversation, and an oddly uplifting sense that adversity had brought them together. Marlon found himself listening to stories from all over the country. Some drivers were from Texas, others from Ohio, and one from as far as Arizona. Each had unique tales of life on the road, the perils of long-haul trucking, and the families waiting for them back home. Outside, the wind calmed, though the cold remained brutal. Snowplows struggled on major roads, leaving the smaller ones to fend for themselves. A few brave souls from Greenhaven ventured out, knocking on the diner's door, hoping for a warm meal. Without hesitation, Marlon welcomed them in too. Late that night, as the group settled in again for an uneasy sleep, Marlon stared outside at the silent moonlit snowdrifts. He was tired physically and emotionally from cooking and hosting strangers all day long. Yet a strong sense of purpose coursed through him. He recalled his mother's words from childhood. "The world may be cold, son, but you don't have to be." If only he had known that the next chapter would test his spirit more than ever before. By the second day, word of Marlon's generosity began to spread throughout the region. While phone lines were spotty, social media posts trickled out from the stranded truckers or the local townspeople. One trucker posted a short video on TikTok panning across the snow-encased diner, capturing the moment Marlon handed out steaming plates of food. "This man saved us all," said the trucker in the video. He stayed open to feed everyone stuck in the storm. If you ever find yourself on I-90 near Greenhaven, make sure you stop by Marlon's Eats. The video garnered a surprising number of views, with viewers leaving comments like, "This is true kindness, and we need more people like Marlon in this world." Strangers from faraway states were suddenly aware of a small diner in upstate New York. Meanwhile, local radio station 103.7, known as The Rocking Rooster, broadcast a short segment about the diner's new role as a community shelter. A staffer from the station who lived in Greenhaven phoned in a report that Marlon Freeman had become an accidental hero of the storm. Back in the diner, supplies ran lower by the hour. More people had arrived, locals who had lost power, travelers who had slid off the road, even a family of 4 whose minivan got stuck. Marlon faced the mounting pressure with stoic determination, but deep down, he was anxious. He had no idea how he could feed so many mouths with dwindling groceries. In the afternoon, a small miracle arrived in the form of a battered pickup truck crawling through the snow. Its bed stacked with boxes of fresh produce, bread, and other essentials. The driver, a stout man in a neon yellow parka, introduced himself as Dave, the owner of Dave's Grocery, the local supermarket in Greenhaven. He had heard from Maggie and others about how Marlon was hosting stranded folks. Determined to help, Dave spent the morning organizing supplies he could spare. "I can't offer everything for free," Dave explained sheepishly, "but we can set up a tab for you. Pay me back whenever you get on your feet." Marlon, though thankful, felt his heart twist. He had some savings, but not a lot. Business had been slow that winter, and the repairs on the diner's old roof a month ago had depleted much of his emergency fund. Still, he accepted the supplies, determined that no one would go hungry on his watch. The diners turned refugees gathered around, cheering the arrival of more food. With renewed energy, Marlon and Maggie busied themselves in the kitchen, cooking up a storm of soups, sandwiches, and hearty dinners. The atmosphere was borderline festive. People were cold-stranded, uncertain about when they could move on, but the sense of community was unmistakable. That night, as a hush settled over the diner, an unspoken question lingered. How long could this go on? The roads remained mostly impassable. The local government declared a state of emergency, telling people not to drive unless absolutely necessary. More trucks were sure to roll off the interstate once conditions eased. If they got wind of a warm diner with a compassionate owner, they might all come here. Little did Marlon know the seeds of a much larger event had been planted that day. By continuing to feed and house those in need, he was unknowingly changing his own destiny. On the third day of being snowed in the skies, finally began to clear. Plows and salt trucks rumbled onto secondary roads, though the going was slow. At dawn, Maggie pointed out the window at a convoy of vehicles creeping past inch by inch, struggling against the remnants of the storm's fury. Despite the partial clearing, Marlon's diner was still near capacity. More people showed up, having heard from the local radio or from neighbors that Marlon wouldn't turn anyone away. He was burning through the supplies Dave had dropped off. Everyone pitched in, some washing dishes, others cleaning tables and floors, making the diner a cooperative place rather than a standard business. Just after noon, a large truck emblazoned with the red and white logo of the American Red Cross pulled into the snow-riddled parking lot. Out stepped two uniformed volunteers, greeted by applause from inside. They carried blankets, medical supplies, and non-perishable food. Word had reached them that the diner was acting as a makeshift shelter. Marlon greeted them with a warm smile. "You folks just made my day," he said. "We're grateful for any assistance. There's about 20 people here at the moment." The volunteers named Sarah and Thomas asked Marlon all sorts of questions. How many stranded travelers? Any medical conditions? Enough heat? Enough power? They took notes, promising to send a relief team if necessary. Then they spoke of hearing how Marlon had been feeding everyone out of his own pocket. "That's what I'm here for," Marlon replied simply. Yet he felt a twinge of worry. He owed Dave's grocery money for the supplies, and the diner's normal business had come to a standstill with the storm. "You'll be getting more folks, I imagine," Sarah said. "The interstate is partially reopened, but there's a massive backlog of trucks that were stranded farther west. Many of them will be passing through soon." A pang of dread stabbed at Marlon's chest. He tried to imagine wave after wave of trucks rolling in, hearing about the diner's generosity. He was proud to have helped people so far. But how could he continue at this pace without going bankrupt? That night he confided in Maggie as they scrubbed pots in the steamy kitchen. "I'm worried, Maggie. I'll keep cooking as long as the supplies last. But what if more and more people show up? I can't pay for everything out of thin air." She looked at him sympathetically. "I know. But maybe the attention will help. People are talking about this place on the radio and online. Maybe someone will start a fundraiser or something." "Fundraiser," Marlon repeated. He shrugged, unsure if he liked the idea of turning to the public for charity. He'd always prided himself on self-reliance, but this was no ordinary situation. "Well," Maggie said, "you don't have to decide tonight. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're helping a lot of folks, Marlon. We'll figure out the rest." Marlon nodded, uncertain what the future held. As exhausted as he felt, a quiet sense of hope still warmed his heart. Maybe there would be a silver lining to all of this. Yet behind that hope, a silent, creeping dread told him that the real challenges were yet to come. On the fourth day, the diner had a moment of calm. A few of the stranded travelers took advantage of slightly better road conditions to continue their journeys. Others stayed until they were sure the highways would stay open. The diner's population dropped to around 15, giving Marlon a chance to catch his breath. However, that reprieve was short-lived. By late morning, the sky was clear, the wind calm, and the roads were finally plowed enough for commerce to resume. Truckers who had been stuck at rest areas farther west or in line at way stations suddenly had the green light to move. Many had heard rumors of a diner that never closed during the storm, a diner whose owner had been feeding and helping travelers without hesitation. The first sign of the incoming wave was a low rumble of engines on the highway. A single rig pulled off the exit, then another, and another. Soon a caravan of trucks was descending upon Greenhaven. They came not just from the immediate area, but from further out, having heard over CB radios, from social media posts, and from their dispatchers who repeated the story of the diner that saved everybody in the blizzard. In less than an hour, the diner's parking lot went from nearly empty to jam-packed with rigs of every color, shape, and cargo type. The line of trucks stretched out onto the local roads, then back onto the exit ramp. Some truckers parked on the shoulder, hoping to catch a glimpse of this now legendary place. Inside the diner, Marlon and Maggie looked out the window in stunned silence. The door swung open, bringing in a gust of cold air and a wave of new faces. Many just wanted a cup of coffee, the chance to shake Marlon's hand, to say thanks for what he did for fellow drivers in their time of need. Others needed a hot meal after days of rationing. Still others just wanted to be part of this improbable event, to stand in the place that had quickly become a symbol of compassion. Marlon was overwhelmed, his eyes darting from face to face. Strangers greeted him like an old friend, some wanting photos, others expressing heartfelt gratitude. He tried to keep a steady demeanor, offering a smile and a handshake or hug. "We heard about you on the radio," one trucker said. "I had to stop by." "You're a legend, man," a younger driver chimed in. "They're calling you the guardian of I-90 on social media." Marlon felt the weight of these accolades. His staff consisted of Maggie, a part-time cook, who couldn't make it today, and himself. How could they handle this avalanche of new customers? Where would they all sit? How would he feed them? Yet he forced himself to remain calm. "Come on in," he repeated, guiding the newcomers. "We'll serve as many as we can." Maggie began taking orders, her notepad quickly filling. The small kitchen roared to life with the hiss of hot oil, the clang of pots and pans. Marlon worked feverishly at the stove, sweat beading on his forehead. He alternated between flipping burgers, frying chicken, and stirring pots of gravy. Out in the dining area, the truckers found any available seat or stood along the walls. It soon became apparent that there was no way the diner alone could satisfy this crowd. Some just wanted to pay for a meal to show support, then leave. Others wanted to stick around and talk. The local grocery store, seeing the sudden spike in traffic, scrambled to replenish the diner's supplies. Dave came through again, delivering more produce and bread, but the lines of truckers kept growing. Through it all, Marlon's phone buzzed non-stop. The local radio station wanted an interview. A major news network had called hoping to send a reporter. People from other states were hearing about the miracle diner of I-90 and wanted to talk to its humble owner. Marlon's heart pounded. He was not used to this kind of attention. Amid the chaos, he stayed focused on one principle. Feed those who are hungry, welcome those who are weary. No matter how intense things got, he remembered his mother's motto: kindness is never wasted. Little did he know, however, that not all attention is good attention. Somewhere out there, fate was preparing a karmic twist that would hit him harder than any winter storm. As the days passed, the crowd of truckers ebbed and flowed. Some arrived in droves, others departed, continuing their journeys after shaking Marlon's hand. Donations began to trickle in small amounts of cash left on the counter, or groceries dropped off by local supporters. The diner's finances, once on the brink, due to the free meals and tabs at Dave's grocery, seemed to be stabilizing. But along with the well-wishers came a new sort of tension. A local news crew set up outside to broadcast live capturing footage of the endless rigs lining the roadway. A couple of bloggers arrived filming everything, posting real-time updates to their YouTube channels. Most visitors were respectful, but a few seemed more interested in sensationalizing the story, asking pointed questions, or even digging into Marlon's personal background. One quiet afternoon, a large SUV pulled up. A man in a sleek suit emerged, accompanied by a woman with a stern expression. They strolled into the diner, ignoring the friendly chatter from the truckers heading straight toward Marlon. Maggie noticed them first and gave Marlon a nudge. "Something about these two feels off," she whispered. Marlon wiped his hands on his apron and approached them. "Hello. Welcome to Marlon's Eats. What can I get for you?" The man flashed a business card. "Troy Vance, from Vance Consulting. This is my associate, Ms. Mitchell. We're here to talk business." Marlon blinked, his mind racing. "Business. How can I help you?" They glanced around the diner, taking in the packed tables, the cheerful chatter. "We've heard about your success story here. The videos, the radio coverage," Ms. Mitchell said in a flat tone. "We're in the business of brand management. A place like this could capitalize on its newfound fame." Marlon's stomach knotted. "I'm not sure I follow." Troy Vance smiled a practiced expression. "We want to help you go national. You've got a unique angle, a small-town diner that's become a symbol of kindness and community. With our help, you could become a franchise, open new locations, maybe even land a spot on a major culinary show." Marlon stood silently for a moment, absorbing their words. He glanced at Maggie, who looked equally unsure. Finally, he spoke. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking to expand. I just did what I thought was right, helping people stuck in the storm." "You're sitting on a gold mine," Ms. Mitchell pressed. "Think of the philanthropic angle people would pay to associate themselves with your brand of altruism." Troy handed him a glossy folder containing proposals, charts, and pictures of potential expansions. The numbers dazzled, showing hypothetical profits in the hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, should Marlon license his brand. "It's an opportunity you shouldn't pass up," Troy insisted. Marlon felt uneasy. He knew the diner's sudden fame might fade. Yet the idea of turning his mother's humble eatery into a commercial brand felt wrong. "I need time to think," he said, tucking the folder under the counter. "This is a lot to take in." They exchanged business cards and left, reminding him to call soon. Marlon watched them walk out, the pit of his stomach heavy. Part of him wondered if maybe they were right, if this was his chance to secure his future. Another part felt it was a betrayal of the diner's core identity, a friendly, no-frills place where people found comfort. As if on cue, the phone rang. Maggie answered it, then handed it to Marlon. "It's a reporter from WNWIX," she said. "They want a statement from you." He put the receiver to his ear. A cheerful voice started rattling off questions about the diner's role in saving stranded truckers, about rumored expansions, about how it felt to be a local celebrity. Marlon fielded them politely, but his words were uncertain, tinged with nerves. When he hung up, Maggie gave him a worried look. "This is getting bigger than we ever imagined," she said. "We never asked for any of it," Marlon whispered back. "I just wanted to help people in a storm." Outside, the line of rigs continued to grow. The blizzard had ended, but a new storm of media attention, business opportunists and personal dilemmas was only beginning. Weeks passed, and the fervor around the diner showed no immediate sign of dying down. But with more exposure came more scrutiny. A local tabloid wrote a piece questioning why Marlon, a black man, had chosen this small, predominantly white town to set up a diner in the first place. They dragged out an old story from his younger days when he'd been briefly arrested for trespassing during a protest in Rochester. Though the charges had been dropped, the tabloid spun the narrative to suggest shady motives, perhaps trying to stir up controversy. At the same time, some of the stranded truckers who had once praised him now grumbled about rising prices on the menu. Marlon had to increase some rates to cover the new cost of constant supplies and to pay back the tab he owed Dave. A few customers accused him of cashing in on charity, saying that once the big wave of generosity ended, he hiked up prices. Even the local town council began to express concerns about the sudden influx of trucks clogging the roads. They sent a notice to Marlon, citing potential fire code violations due to overcrowding in the diner, as well as complaints from local residents about noise and traffic. The diner, once a beloved neighborhood spot, was now a magnet for out-of-towners, and not everyone welcomed the change. On a frigid morning, Marlon received a formal letter from the zoning board, warning him that the lot behind the diner was not designated for large truck parking. If he didn't take steps to reduce congestion, they would slap him with heavy fines or even force him to close temporarily. All of this stress started to weigh on Marlon. His warm smile grew strained. He lost sleep lying awake, haunted by the sense that his good deed was spinning out of control. Maggie did her best to reassure him, but the weight of financial obligations and negative media attention was becoming too much to bear. Then came the final blow. Late one evening after closing the diner, Marlon heard a shattering sound. He rushed outside to find the diner's window smashed shards of glass glittering on the snow. Beside the broken window was a piece of cardboard with the words scrawled in bright red paint. "Go back where you came from." It was a gut punch, a cruel reminder that prejudice and hate could surface anywhere at any time. All his life, Marlon had battled stereotypes and subtle racism. Now, at the height of his diner's fame, a shadowy figure reminded him that not everyone viewed him as a hero. The next day, a furious Maggie urged him to call the police to alert the press. But Marlon, though shaken, refused to fan the flames. "I don't want revenge," he said quietly. "I just want peace." But peace seemed elusive. The diner, once a haven for stranded travelers, had become ground zero for a storm of controversy. The question now was, how would Marlon weather it? Or would the situation ultimately destroy everything he had built? In the midst of his turmoil, Marlon found unlikely allies. Many truckers who had benefited from his kindness banded together, forming a loose online collective. They set up a GoFundMe page titled "Support Marlon's Diner," explaining how Marlon had opened his doors during the worst blizzard in recent memory, feeding and sheltering them without hesitation. Their goal was to raise enough money to help Marlon pay off his debts to Dave's Grocery and to repair the damage from the vandalism. Within days, the fundraiser gained traction. Other truckers, Some who had never even met Marlon shared the link on social media. Local TV stations picked up the story highlighting both Marlon's hardships and the wave of support pouring in. Donations trickled in steadily, at first $5 here, $10 there. But then a video clip went viral. It showed dashcam footage from one of the truckers who had been stranded that first night. Snow swirled around the diner's neon sign as Marlon stepped out into the storm to guide the truck safely into the parking lot. The sincerity in Marlon's face, the raw sense of relief from the driver, tugged at people's hearts. Suddenly, the GoFundMe soared past $10,000, then $20,000. The local community pitched in, too. Dave's Grocery waived some of Marlon's debt, calling it a gesture of thanks for all he had done. Others offered to help fix the broken window. The African American community in nearby Rochester organized a caravan of support driving to the diner in a parade of vehicles to show unity. Marlon was overwhelmed by the generosity. He had never asked for a handout, never dreamed of being in the spotlight. Yet here it was, the power of collective goodwill coming to counterbalance the nastiness he had faced. It didn't erase the hateful note or the vandalism, but it did remind him that for every act of malice, there could be 10 acts of kindness. For a moment, it seemed like the story might find a happy ending, but fate, it seemed, had another twist to offer. One crisp afternoon, as trucks lined the diner's lot once more, Marlon noticed a police cruiser pulling up. 2 officers stepped out. Marlon's heart sank. He worried about another complaint from the town council, another zoning issue. He stepped outside to greet them. "Mr. Freeman," one officer said politely, "we need to talk to you about an investigation." Marlon swallowed hard. The officer handed him a folder. Inside were documents referencing the vandalism and multiple complaints filed regarding traffic noise, and even an accusation that Marlon was operating a lodging facility without a proper license because he let stranded people sleep overnight in the diner during the storm. The officer explained that while the vandalism was under investigation, the local government was also pursuing a case against Marlon for not adhering to safety and zoning regulations. There was talk of a substantial fine. If not paid, they could force the diner to close until compliance was met. Marlon's hands trembled as he clutched the papers. Officer I was just helping people who had nowhere else to go. What else was I supposed to do? Kick them out in a blizzard? The officers seemed sympathetic, but their expressions were resigned. "We understand, Mr. Freeman. We're just following up on orders from the council. We'll do our best to advocate for you, but the law is the law." As they left, Marlon felt tears sting his eyes. All his life, he had tried to do right by others, to hold on to the values his mother instilled in him. And now he was facing possible closure of his beloved diner simply because he showed compassion. It felt like a slap in the face. That evening, Maggie stayed late, helping him sort through the official documents. Sure enough, the fines threatened to be hefty, several $1,000s. The diner would need certain safety upgrades if it was to continue hosting people overnight. The letter suggested that if he didn't comply, the doors could be padlocked. "I can't believe this." Maggie fumed. "You practically saved this town, and now they want to throw the book at you." Marlon buried his face in his hands. "Maybe they're right. I never got a permit to let so many people stay overnight. I was just doing what I thought was right." Maggie slammed her hand on the counter. Right for humanity, yes, but apparently not right for bureaucrats. They sat in silence for a long time, weighed down by frustration and sadness. Then unexpectedly, Marlon's phone buzzed with a text. He flipped it open. It was from a trucker he barely knew, someone he had served during the storm. The message was simple. Saw the news about potential fines. Don't worry, we're with you. Marlon's eyes welled. He glanced at Maggie, a small smile forming on his tired face. They're not giving up on me, he said softly. She nodded. Then we can't give up either. The next day, a rally formed outside Marlon's diner. Truckers, townspeople, and well-wishers from nearby areas gathered holding homemade signs that read, "Support Marlon" and "Kindness over regulations." Some carried banners praising the diner as a pillar of community spirit. Even local politicians appeared, sensing the public mood shift. They made speeches about reviewing the zoning laws, emphasizing that while safety was paramount, they couldn't ignore the extraordinary circumstances of the blizzard and Marlon's act of goodwill. Local journalists captured the scene, broadcasting it live. Social media lit up with photos and videos of the rally testimonies from people Marlon had helped, along with hashtags like Stand with Marlon. Donations to the GoFundMe soared again. By afternoon, the entire area around the diner was transformed into a carnival-like atmosphere, with families bringing home-cooked food, kids playing in the snow, and truckers honking their horns in solidarity. The hum of engines was no longer just traffic. It was a statement of unity. A phone call changed everything. The head of the zoning board reached out, inviting Marlon to a special hearing. The official explained they would expedite the process, given the unique nature of the situation. Marlon took a deep breath. This was a chance to fix things, to argue his case. When the day of the hearing came, Marlon showed up in his best shirt and tie, heart hammering in his chest. A line of supporters stood outside the town hall chanting his name. Inside, the board members sat in a row, flipping through pages of documents. Marlon spoke from his heart, explaining exactly what happened during the blizzard, how he couldn't possibly turn people away. He admitted to not following certain procedures, but stressed the urgency of the crisis. Then, to his surprise, one by one, truckers and local residents stepped forward to speak on his behalf. They told stories of how Marlon's diner saved them from freezing, how his kindness exemplified the best of humanity. By the time the hearing concluded, the board members wore conflicted expressions. They retreated to a back room for deliberation. 30 minutes later, they returned with a statement. The fines would be waived in recognition of Marlon's exceptional service during a state of emergency. As for the future, he would be required to make minor changes to handle overnight guests if a similar situation arose. But they would allow him a grace period to make those modifications. The diner would remain open. The crowd erupted in cheers outside. Marlon stood there, dazed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Maggie hugged him, and a wave of relief washed over them both. In the swirl of celebration, Marlon caught a glimpse of a young boy in the crowd, staring up at him with awe. The boy's mother leaned down and whispered something in his ear. The boy then approached Marlon, offering a shy smile. "Someday I want to help people like you." "Do," he said. Marlon knelt down, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can, son. You don't need a diner or a storm to be kind. Just do what's in your heart." The boy nodded solemnly, as though committing Marlon's words to memory. In that moment, Marlon realized that the real legacy of this experience wasn't about money, fame, or even saving his diner. It was about inspiring others to keep kindness alive against all odds. The town of Greenhaven never looked quite the same after the storm. Though the snow had melted and spring crept in with hesitant buds on the trees and warmer winds, the memory of those harrowing days stayed etched in the hearts of everyone who passed through Marlon's diner. But for Marlon Freeman, it wasn't just a memory. It was a turning point. The aftermath of the zoning board hearing brought more than just legal relief. It brought clarity. With the threat of closure lifted and the fines officially waived, Marlon breathed a sigh of hard-earned peace. The GoFundMe campaign, launched by the truckers who once sought shelter within his walls, had surpassed all expectations. Not only did it cover the debts he owed Dave's grocery, it also gave him enough to make the minor safety upgrades required by the town. The broken window that once bore a hateful message was now replaced not with plain glass, but with a mural that made locals and newcomers alike pause in reflection. A local artist moved by the story, and Marlon's quiet strength had painted a powerful image. 2 hands, one. Black one, white, clasped in a handshake beneath the bold words, "Neighbors in every storm." It wasn't just a symbol of what had happened. It was a promise, etched in art, to the town and its future. The media frenzy had slowly faded, as all stories eventually do, but the essence of Marlon's tale lingered in a more permanent way. Travel bloggers began featuring Marlon's Eats as a hidden gem of upstate New York. Review sites were flooded with glowing praise. One post read, "Came for the fried chicken, stayed for the humanity." Marlon never called back Troy Vance or considered franchising. He kept the proposal folder in a drawer in his small office unopened since the day of the hearing. It served as a reminder of what he could have chased, but didn't. The diner's soul wasn't meant to be replicated. Its charm, its warmth, its authenticity came from being real, not branded. Each morning, Marlon still opened his doors before the sun fully rose, just as he had before the blizzard ever arrived. Maggie returned to her regular shifts, and they welcomed a few new part-time hires to help manage the larger crowds. Though the flood of truckers had slowed to a steady trickle, the diner remained busier than ever, filled not with chaos, but with purpose. One quiet evening, as twilight bathed the diner in golden light, a young couple walked in. The man looked vaguely familiar, but it was the photo in his hand that gave him away. It was Rick, the first trucker Marlon had helped that stormy night, now freshly shaven, smiling with a toddler balanced on his hip. "I told my wife I needed to bring our boy to the place where a stranger saved my life," he said. "He needs to know kindness still exists." Marlon's eyes glistened. He didn't need awards or headlines. This was enough. Throughout the spring and into early summer, letters and packages trickled in from across the country. Some were from people Marlon had helped directly, others from those who had simply read or heard about the story. One letter came from a school in Texas, where a class of 5th graders had raised money by selling lemonade and crafts, donating it to Marlon's diner to help keep the kindness going. Another envelope held a photograph of an elderly man in a hospital bed with a note scribbled by his daughter. "He was stranded during the storm. You fed him. A week later he had a heart attack, but he made it. We think your kindness kept him strong enough to pull through." On his shelf above the register, Marlon began placing these letters and photos in a binder labeled Storm Stories. He kept it there not for decoration, but as a compass. On difficult days when the fryer overheated or deliveries were delayed or he doubted whether he could keep going, he flipped through its pages and remembered why he stayed open that night. And still there were moments of silence, quiet late hours after closing when he'd sit at the counter with a mug of herbal tea, the mural glowing softly behind him. He often thought of his mother, who once told him, "Son, you may not be able to change the world, but you can always change someone's day." He smiled at how literal that became. Then one day, a letter arrived that stopped him cold. It was handwritten in looping cursive and enclosed a Polaroid photo. A bearded trucker in a flannel coat stood beside two grinning children holding a sign that read, "Thank you for giving Daddy a place to come home from." The note read, "We don't have much, but we hope to someday to visit your diner. Until then, know you're in our prayers. You didn't just feed my husband, you gave him back to us." Marlon pressed the photo to his chest, emotion welling up inside him. In that single moment, he saw the full ripple of his actions. He hadn't just served meals, he had served hope, dignity, and a sense of belonging. And so life at Marlon's Eats continued. No longer just a diner, it had become a monument to resilience, compassion, and community. The storms of the world would come and go, but Marlon's little place by the highway stood ready always with the coffee hot and the door open. He knew now more than ever that kindness wasn't a grand gesture. It was a daily commitment, one plate at a time. From a single decision to stay open during the worst blizzard in living memory, Marlon Freeman transformed his small-town diner into an extraordinary sanctuary of hope. His simple act of kindness drew truckers, families, and eventually an entire community into one shared story. One that reminded everyone of the binding power of compassion. Yes, he faced trials, mounting debt, negative press, even hate. But in the end, an outpouring of support, an endless line of rigs arrived as both a testament to and reward for that unwavering generosity. With his diner's windows replaced, finances secured, and spirit unbroken, Marlon moves forward with renewed conviction that one person's kindness can change the world. If you found inspiration in this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Spread this powerful message of humanity far and wide, and let's keep the flame of kindness burning bright, one heart at a time.